Depending on where you purchased your DJI Mini 3 Pro from here in the UK, the drone should now be well on the way, or even unboxed and flying. Today, we're going to be answering the questions that have been coming up in terms of where you can fly your new Mini 3, under what rules. There is an overall feeling that being sub 250 grams, that the Mini range is something of a rule beater, but there are still some important rules to follow to prevent you falling foul of the authorities. To keep things simple and this video as short as possible, this drone rules explainer is only intended for sub 250 gram drones like the Mini 3 Pro. So if you're flying a drone above this weight, please refer to our drone rules playlist linked in the description. There are also chapters below to allow you to move around this video easily, as I'm sure there'll be sections you already know. Right, now we'll get into the main points you need to remember, but there are also a number of bonus points at the end of this video relating to airports, pre-flight checks, that kind of thing that you'll want to hear, so stick around. The first and main point I would make briefly before we talk about the rules themselves is the overall spirit of them. The main aim here is to have you flying your drone confidently and safely, not to catch you out or fine you for no reason. Flying a drone is a fun hobby that is enjoyed by more and more people. So please don't let the rules intimidate you or stop you flying. Once you get them down, I promise it is a straightforward process that will become second nature very quickly. First up, let's talk about registration. Here in the UK, we have DMARES, the Drone and Model Aircraft Registration and Education Scheme. It is made up of two parts, and although it is actually termed a drone registration, it's actually you that is registered rather than any specific drone. The two parts of DMARES are known as the Operator ID, which confirms you are the person or organisation responsible for a drone, and the second part is the Flyer ID, which shows you have the basic knowledge of the rules to fly a drone. For your Mini 3 Pro, there is only a requirement to have the first part, an operator ID. You get this by registering on the official CAA website. There is a link in the description below to that as well. And then you display the operator ID number you get on a small label on the drone itself. This is renewed each year at a cost of £10. It's just gone up by £1 per year. You do not currently require a Flyer ID to fly a sub 250 gram drone such as the Mini 3 Pro, but I personally recommend taking it as you'll learn a good amount about the rules and flight safety. It lasts for 5 years and it's free. Also, all the answers you need to pass are within the drone code website itself, so it isn't too taxing to learn either. But again, you do not need the Flyer ID to fly your Mini 3 Pro, so it is a personal choice. The other stipulation in terms of pilot competence might seem an odd one, but it is actually very important. You need to have read the manual. It might seem obvious and maybe even redundant, but for anyone who has flown a drone without reading the manual, go take a look. You will be surprised at what is listed there by the manufacturer and some of the information that they actually provide. Up next, we are talking about airspace and one of the exciting benefits you gain with sub 250 gram drones like the Mini 3 Pro in the UK. The open category of airspace is what you'll be flying under as a hobbyist. This airspace is split into three categories: A1 flying over people, A2 flying close to people, and A3 flying far from people. The Mini 3 Pro has access to all of these airspace types straight out the box. This means you can fly your Mini 3 in congested areas with zero separation of uninvolved people and even fly over them. Something you cannot do with any other drone type as a hobbyist. You need to ensure you operate within these parameters safely, so run a mental risk assessment of the location and make sure you feel a drone flight is even safe or appropriate. When flying a drone, it is your absolute responsibility to do so responsibly. So you could be flying within the rules and still be deemed as operating unsafely. So think about the flight before you take off, especially when close to people. Planning is everything. Talking a little bit more about flying over people, there is one specific situation where you cannot fly over people, even with your sub 250 Mini 3 Pro, and that is when those people are crowded together. The official advice is whenever a person is unable to move out of the way of an emergency situation, such as your drone falling from the sky or being forced to land or a fault, that type of thing, then you should not be flying over them. So be careful in parks and certainly avoid crowded locations such as shopping centres, etc. The next part of the airspace we will discuss is airspace clearance. Flying a sub 250 gram drone like the DJI Mini 3 Pro gives no extra benefits at all in terms of airspace requirements. You still need to carry out all the checks to make sure you are clear to fly. This includes things like avoiding airport exclusion zones and checking whether or not there are any other temporary or permanent flight restrictions in place in that airspace. These could be in place for a number of safety reasons, and flying your drone into one is a very serious issue that you can expect a swift response from authorities over. In particular, do not simply go by the DJI built-in geofencing system. I often hear people say, the DJI lets you take off, then you're fine. This simply isn't the case, as temporary zones do not appear, and the DJI map actually differs from the restrictions issued by the CAA. My top tip here is to download an app called Drone Assist, which will give you all sorts of information, including whether or not there are any restrictions at a glance. Moving on, and we need to talk about visual line of sight. This rule means you need to keep your drone within your direct line of sight at all times. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be looking at the drone the entire time. There is essential information displayed on the app, on your phone, etc., which is attached to your controller, that you need to observe. And it's important you are scanning the surrounding airspace for obstacles and other aircraft. Visual line of sight means should you look to where your drone is in the sky, which you should certainly be looking at the majority of the time, then you can clearly see it. The UK CAA gives a general guidance rule of 500 meters, but this is dependent on the size of drone, weather and other conditions. For instance, I personally would not be able to see the Mini 3 at 500 meters clearly enough to know the direction and see the surrounding airspace. Visual line of sight is a bit of a controversial rule because, of course, we are all different and can see at different distances. However, flights that are obviously beyond line of sight, so well out of visual range or by going behind buildings, etc., are certainly not allowed. One exception to the visual line of sight rules is covered by point 35 of the drone code, flying with follow me mode active. It states that some drones have a follow me mode. That means you can set your aircraft to follow you within a fixed distance. You do not have to keep your drone in direct line of sight when follow me mode is active and set to follow within 50 meters of you. You must still follow all other points of the drone code. So make sure you're very confident the drone isn't going to hit anyone. And my personal advice is not to rely on the Mini 3 obstacle avoidance to dodge people nearby. This could be a very helpful, useful exception to get some great shots of you walking into the sunset. Whilst we're talking distances, it's worth mentioning the maximum height you're allowed to fly at. This is a maximum of 400 feet or 120 meters from the nearest point of the Earth's surface. Take into account the from the Earth's surface part. This doesn't mean your takeoff position, it means the drone's position in relation to the closest point of the Earth. So if you're flying around hills, etc., you'll need to adjust as required. One part of the air navigation order that I recommend keeping in mind when you are flying your drone is Article 241, which states a person must not recklessly or negligently cause or permit an aircraft to endanger any person or property. So keep in mind that you need to act responsibly and safely at all times. This is an article often forgotten, and it's a bit of a catch-all, so beware. Another area people can fall foul of is adding weight to your sub 250 gram drone and not realizing this removes the benefits of flying in congested areas and over people. If you add things like ND filters, heavy wraps, strobe lights, landing gear, any of the many accessories available for drones like the Mini 3 Pro, you could take your takeoff weight over the 250 gram mark. Remember, it is the weight of your drone at the time of takeoff that counts, so just be aware. Next up, a few bonus tips and points to help you get the most out of your DJI Mini 3 Pro and fly with confidence. First up, always carry out pre- and post-flight checks of the drone. You might be surprised how contact with bugs and debris can damage your props and the arms of the drone, so check regularly that everything is working correctly and in tip-top shape. Replace your props at any sign of wear and tear to avoid much more expensive issues when they fail during flight. When flying your drone, keep a keen ear and eye out for emergency service helicopters such as air ambulances. They will approach quickly and will have to halt their flight or take evasive action to avoid your drone. If this does happen, firstly, hover your drone in place and assess what action should be taken, often including dropping height or landing where the drone is, but hover first and assess to see what is safest to do. Don't let the weather catch you and your DJI Mini 3 Pro out. Remember, it is not rated to fly fly in anything other than dry conditions. So be aware that fog, mist or rain could cause the drone to fail or act erratically. With cheap consumer drones, you are playing a lottery in terms of moisture ingress and whether or not it might cause an issue. There you have the main rules you need to follow to fly your DJI Mini 3 Pro in the UK as a hobbyist. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Remember to please give this video a quick like, and if you're new here, hit the subscribe button for more content like this. Sean out.